It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative MP Mark Harper, Liberal Democrat MP Layla Moran, Daily Mirror political correspondent Rachel Wearmouth and Times columnist Melanie Phillips. Today, is this just confusing or a sign of getting back to normal?
Londoners and those visiting our city will continue to wear a face covering.
Individuals will make the right judgments in the right circumstances and crowded environments.
We shouldn't lift important restrictions and then expect the public to take responsibility for doing the right thing anyway.
Is this an argument you're going to be hearing more of?
It seems that £4 billion is really bad news. 400 billion, who cares?
Our public finances are under greater strain than ever before in peacetime history.
This has been criticised by some Conservatives, but one high-profile backbencher says they've got it wrong.
What I'm saying to my colleagues is we have to confront the reality of how we are sometimes heard, even by people on our own side.
We'll talk about all of that and bring you Prime Minister's questions live at noon. So let's start with the issue of mask wearing, because depending on where you live in the UK and what you're doing, the rules are going to be different when it comes to wearing masks following the government's decision to remove the legal requirement to wear them in certain settings in England from Monday. Now, you heard Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister in Scotland, and we'll hear from Mark Drayford in Wales later on. But this is how the Daily Mail is reporting it. Mask rules disarray as Mayor Sadiq Khan orders them to be worn on the tube. My opening question to all of you, is this just chaos or what happens when people are asked to make their own judgment? Mark?
No, I don't think it's chaos. I think it is actually the latter. I think, look, we're in a position where we are moving from the point of the government setting down detailed legal prescriptions about how everyone needs to live their life. COVID is going to be with us forever, so we're all going to have to get used to living with it and understanding the risks, understanding how it transmits and dealing with it ourselves. And I think setting out sensible guidance, which the government is doing, I think is sensible. And for myself, you know, wearing a mask in a crowded indoor location is a very sensible thing to do. And I think people are going to behave in that way.
Right, and you're...
and by the way, people that are happy to wear a mask are doing so already and will continue doing so. Those people that are really not going to wear one, they're already not wearing them, even though it's the law. So I don't actually think anything dramatic is going to change next Monday as far as mask wearing. I think people are going to be sensible, follow the Chief Medical Officer's advice, wear them in crowded indoor settings. And I think this is something we're just going to have to get used to as we learn to live with COVID forever.
Get used to it?
Well, it may not be chaos yet, and I don't think it will be chaos, but it's certainly confusing. You know, if you get on a train in Edinburgh and then you cross the border and suddenly it's a different rule. And so I don't understand why a four nations approach wasn't taken to this. That had worked throughout this pandemic because clarity of message was one of the key ways that we were always going to get through this. So my view is that the government actually went a step too far. There's huge public support for mask wearing, particularly indoors. And it's not about you, it protects other people. There are 3.8 million clinically extremely vulnerable people in this country, many of whom need to use the buses to get to their doctor's appointments, and now they feel more scared than they were before. Why not have just kept the rule for them, if nothing else?
Melanie?
Well, if the government now thinks that it's fine for people to use their own responsibility because they can be trusted to use their common sense and sense of personal responsibility and social responsibility, why wasn't it the case before now? The fact is, I think that the government just jumped the gun. This whole business of Freedom Day on July 19 was premature and wrong. Boris Johnson should be much more circumspect, and they're now trying to desperately cover their traces and producing, if not chaos, certainly mixed messages. I mean, the law has a point. The point to the law is that it provides clarity. Everyone knows where they are. here you have a situation where you're going to have different rules applying in different circumstances. And if, for example, say a shop or an institution decides after July the 19th that it wants to require its customers or its users to wear masks in order to protect everybody else, well, you can see what's going to happen. People are going to come along and say, I'm not required to wear a mask, I'm not going to do it. And so you're going to have arguments, you're going to have division. I mean, this is the point of the law. It prevents all that.
No, it doesn't.
Why not?
Well, if you talk to anybody that works in a retail business, I'm afraid some of this controversy has been happening already. Those people who are very aggressively not wanting to wear a mask have already been causing problems. So I really don't think this is going to be an enormous problem. And as I said, it's not for a short period of time. This is learning to live with COVID forever. And you need to teach people how to assess the risks and behave accordingly. And I think it's a very sensible proposal by the government.
Rachel, what's your view, particularly on this idea, as Mark said, that people have been, to some extent, making their own mind or decisions on this already?
Well, I think people who are looking to the government for clear guidance will probably be disappointed, because I think we had last week ministers on the television saying that face masks were going to be an entirely personal choice. And then when the actual official government guidance was published, we found out there was an expectation that people would have to continue wearing a mask. And as Layla was talking a little bit about there, one of the ways that the government has tried to balance this is by sort of putting a few extra burdens on the people who are clinically vulnerable. The guidance that they've given to the clinically vulnerable people, which covers some 3.5 million people in England, is that they should avoid people who are not double jabbed, and they should avoid some indoor spaces that aren't ventilated. It seems like we're asking the clinically vulnerable to compromise, as opposed to asking people generally to use to be restricted to allow clinically vulnerable people to go about their lives.
All right, Mark, do you want to respond to that? I mean, is it fair to put that sort of burden on people who are at risk?
Well, I think, look, let's see how people respond. I've seen the polling, given that most of the public...
And they're very in favour
think wearing... Well, indeed. So why everyone is thinking that come the Monday everyone is suddenly going to not be sensible, I have a slightly higher view of the public than that. I think the public are going to follow the rules. I think people going into crowded indoor settings, so on the tube, on the train, whatever. But, you know, if you're on a train and there aren't any other passengers there, it is a bit silly to require you to wear a mask because it serves no useful purpose. I think people are perfectly capable, and as the Chief Medical Officer said, using common manners and courtesy. There are lots of things that we do thinking of others, behaving in a sensible way, and I think that's what most people will do. Those people who are not going to behave like that, I'm afraid, are already not behaving like that, whatever the law says.
But Mark, I think it's entirely unfair to suggest that by asking for clarity of message, clarity from the government, that in any way is putting down people who have had a really difficult 18 months, have a lot going on, and just want a very clear steer from the government.
No, there is a clear message.
Should I be wearing a mask indoors or not?
In a crowded indoor setting,
and the answer is, in Scotland and potentially Wales, yes. And in England, well, you decide. Can you not see how for some people that is confusing? It is, and it will mean that there will be more people not wearing masks.
No, but that isn't what the government's saying. The government's saying in a crowded indoor setting, you should wear a face cover.
But it's not a legal requirement.
That's right. No, but the government's saying
but also
that
it isn't appropriate.
It isn't appropriate for basically forever, for the government to set legal rules about how we all behave in our lives.
Not forever, absolutely not forever.
But the
this
point
idea
is, Layla,
of forever versus
when would you do it, Layla?
But Layla, it isn't for a few more weeks. This is the point that people have got to understand. COVID is going to be endemic. It is going to be with us forever. We've got to get to the point where we trust people to learn how to live with this permanently.
All right.
This isn't about extending it for a few weeks. This is the mistake.
We are in the middle.
But hang on, Layla, just before we move on, when would be the right time for you?
Well, we are in the middle of a rising curve, right? These epidemiological curves, we all know what they look like now. They are sombreros, they go up, you want to flatten them, and at some point they will come down. To remove mask wearing when we're on the way up is entirely the wrong time. And what's the right time? Well, when infections start to go down. And at the moment, it's exactly the wrong time.
And then you're going to be yo-yoing backwards and forwards. It's much better to get people to understand what the risks are and get them to make sensible decisions permanently.
OK, well, you're not going to persuade each other. Not that that's necessarily the point of the discussion in that sense. We're going to talk about overseas aid and that vote yesterday. This is the headline in the Financial Times. Boris Johnson sees off Tory rebellion on overseas aid cuts. And this is what he said in the Commons yesterday.
But everyone will accept that when you're suddenly compelled to spend £407 billion on sheltering our people from an economic hurricane never experienced in living memory, there must inevitably be consequences for other areas of public spending.
Rachel, do you think we're going to hear a lot more of the sort of argument being set out there by Boris Johnson when it comes to government spending?
I think the short answer to that is yes. When you look at the figures, the OBR, the body which marks the government's sort of tax and spending homework, this week it's kind of pretty stark, some of the figures that they're saying that the government will still continue need to spend to keep the economy going. For example, an extra 10 billion a year for the next 3 years on services like NHS and education. When you look at the amount of money we've already been borrowing, you know, last year it was something like 300 billion. This year it's going to be more than 200 billion. And then there are longer term challenges like climate change, which is going to cost some 350 billion over the next 30 years. So I think the big question now, as we sort of look ahead to the autumn and think about how Rishi Sunak is going to approach this, he'll be thinking about just who is he going to shortchange. We already know he's going to cut back the £20 extra amount that he put on universal credit, and he's kind of hinted so far that he might look at the pensions triple lock, which because of a statistical quirk is going to be sort of an 8% rise this year. And I think he has other priorities, and a lot of people crying out for government money. For example, you know, the schools catch-up fund, which is a fraction of the money that the schools catch-up czar. Yes. Kevin Collins, who later resigned, it's a fraction of what he was expecting, the 1.4 billion that the government set out. Right. Well, Mark, Rachel has helpfully listed some of the key priorities that are obviously going to be made in the autumn. Do you agree that this is what Rishi Sunak and the Treasury are now doing? They're beginning to set out exactly where they're going to claw back some of their spending. We're going to see a lot more of this. Yes, I do. I spoke in the aid debate yesterday and I very strongly supported the government. We made, as well as making a promise on aid, we also made a promise to have some level of fiscal responsibility and to control spending and to get the budget back into balance. And you do that for the triple lock on pensions as well? Well, the pandemic's made that very difficult. But I think the problem is many of my colleagues, particularly, the penny hasn't quite dropped that this is going to be happening. Yesterday, I heard a remarkable number of people talk about what we were arguing about yesterday, which was £5,000 million of spending every year on aid, as if £5,000 million wasn't a lot of money. And I'm afraid we have sort of lost our sense of proportion here. Yes, we've had to including Theresa May, the former Prime Minister. I mean, she said, why complain about £4 billion on the backs of the poorest, or taking it away, rather, from the poorest in the world, when you haven't actually blinked at all over £400 billion? Because the £400 billion that we've spent was a one-off amount of money to cover an emergency. When you're talking about the emergencies past and you're talking about ongoing spending, you've got to get the budget back into some semblance of balance, and that's going to be the challenge for the autumn. The Chancellor's going to have to make some tough decisions through the spending review, and we're all going to have these arguments for the next months and years, frankly. I mean, do you accept that, Lady? I mean, the pandemic, is unprecedented. It has been a huge shock to the economy. Are you suggesting, in the way that perhaps Theresa May was, that you can just keep spending on everything?
Well, I think, first of all, on how the government are going to manage this fiscally, they're going to have to come clean with what it is that they are intending to cut. Are they going to raise taxes? How are they going to tackle this? And this is potentially the first in what is going to be a number of manifesto promises that they're intending to break. Well, they've done that, haven't they, with the overseas aid cut? Well, they already have, exactly. But this, in my view, was a cynical and heartless move about something that, frankly, it was a Lib Dem bill that was put through in the coalition years to get us to 0.7 under a lot of duress, I might add. It took a lot of political capital to get there. The Tory party has never really wanted to do this.
Well, there are an awful lot of MPs, of course, who spoke in favour of it.
Indeed, now. And there are a huge number who actually never thought that this was the right thing to do in the first place. So this is now the Tory party reverting to a type that even John Major says he doesn't recognise. He put out a statement yesterday saying that this is not the conservatism he recognises. And that was something I heard on doors in Chesham and Amersham. It was one of the reasons why people were turning away from the Tories, that they break promises and they balance their books on the backs of the world's poorest, the most destitute.
Well,
it shows how heartless they really are.
That's nonsense. We made two promises at the election on aid and on keeping the public finances under control. And what the Chancellor set out was a way of balancing those, given that we've just had a once-in-a-generation pandemic. And I think he clearly got the support of Parliament yesterday. And the aid thing, by the way, that was put through by the coalition government, supported by the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. It was strongly supported by David.
It was a private member's bill
strongly
brought
supported
by a Lib Dem MP, as you well know.
Strongly supported by David Cameron and the government. And the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have made it quite clear we remain committed to that policy and we will return to that level of spending once the fiscal circumstances allow.
Melanie?
All other things being equal, the overseas aid is a noble policy, but all other things are not equal. And although there is always a responsibility to the world and the world's poorest, the overriding responsibility of any government must be to its own people first. And as has been said, this is an unprecedented situation, creating unprecedented need within Britain. Now, we're all going to have arguments, I'm sure, over the next months and years about the priorities that the government should follow and where spending should be directed within the country. But nevertheless, I think that it really does stick in the craw the idea that we are continuing we would be continuing to fund overseas aid projects at the expense of the most vulnerable and needy in our society, not least because overseas aid is not a perfect thing in itself. Much of that money goes to very inappropriate people and helps them suppress and oppress their own populations.
Layla?
That's entirely... that argument is such a trope to people who really don't believe that aid is something that we need to do. The vast majority of this aid, overseen by ICAI, is actually spent really well. DFID is famous across the world. So this is an organisation, an independent arm's-length organisation that was set up by government to scrutinise aid spending. And actually, we have some of the most robust processes in place to make sure that it's spent in the right way. The vast majority of this money... But, Melanie, the question I need to ask you and others who make this argument is, first of all, it is not in our self-interest, if we are serious about helping other countries that we want to now trade with. Global Britain is all about trading with other countries. How are we going to help them develop those economies if we aren't spending money on this? We've got COP26 coming up in November. This fundamentally undermines our position. And that's why the likes of John Major and Theresa May and others who have sat in those top tables negotiating with other countries appreciate that by doing this, we are diminishing our stand in the world. That's one of the key arguments, and it's in our interests to do this.
Melanie?
Well, I think the idea, the implication that other countries are all selfless and noble and giving money at the expense of their own populations is just ludicrous. In a perfect world, what you're saying is correct, but this is not, all other things are not equal. We are in an unprecedented situation.
Right. I mean, Rachel, one of the sort of suggestions put forward by the Treasury that convinced some of the potential rebel Tory MPs is that there would be some sort of independent audit of when it was fiscally responsible and right to return the spending to 0.7. Do you think that will ever happen?
I think that will depend on Rishi Sunak's political choice going forward, I would imagine. But I think just like a lot of the other panellists have said, if you've got all of our former prime ministers raising big questions about this, I think the government perhaps should be taking it more seriously.
Do you agree?
Well, on that point about whether it's down to the Chancellor's choice, that's absolutely not true, because the whole point about yesterday was that it's about some tests that are going to be judged independently by the Office for Budget Responsibility. So that was actually one of the things that reassured a number of my colleagues.
But that had been met only once in the last 20 years, in 2001.
It was met as recently as, as recently as 2018,
That's incorrect, Mark.
Well, hang on, let's clear... OK, well, we will try and clear up the record if it's disputed. disputed.
2018,
And you're basing that on what?
There were
Mark?
Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts in 2018-19 showed we would have met that target.
And you say that's not the case?
It's not the case because the bill itself, the way that you measure the spending is in calendar years and not in fiscal years. And I checked with the Commons Library on this, and it's on the record and it's there. And it's only time that we've actually done it in the way it's measured in the bill is in 2001. So in the last 20 years, only in 2001 would we have actually gone to 0.7. And the point that many of your other colleagues who supported the rebellion were making was that actually let's not look at the crystal ball of the OBR in the future. Actually, let's just look at the past. And on that indication alone, this suggests that this is why we are never going to return to 0.7 by these measures.
Right, we will get to the bottom of this if we can. Of course, do you accept that though? That even if by your measurement it was reached once?
Well, it was reached as many as just 3 years ago. So, no, I think the test is a sensible one. At the moment, we're literally borrowing this money to give away. And I would also just say we remain the second largest aid donor, even after the reduction, in the G7. So of the wealthiest countries in the world, we still are the second most generous to the poorest people around the world, which I think is a record of which the country can be proud. Actually, the Conservative Party and the Conservative government can be proud. And I'm very proud to support that. But I do think you have to recognise we've just had a pandemic which took 10% off the size of the economy. And people that want to keep spending at the same rate we were before have got to answer the question, what would you cut instead and what taxes would you put up? And I heard no one yesterday who wanted to carry on spending money answer either of those questions. I challenge the leader of the Labour Party on it, and he failed.
Which taxes would you put
up,
Layla?
A very important bill coming today, in fact, is the Health and Social Care Bill. And it is Lib Dem policy that we would put up income tax in order to pay for the changes that are needed in the NHS. So actually, we had, in the last manifesto, a very carefully costed manifesto that included that and allowed for aid spending. But I think we also need to make clear, aid spending is not just about giving away. This is not, alms to the poor. It is a return on investment spend that is really important for the country.
We're going to talk about what you've just mentioned, which is the Health and Care Bill. It is back in the Commons today. You may remember that the coalition government of Conservatives and Liberal Democrats proposed a reorganisation which happened in 2012. Well, now the government is proposing another one. Layers of bureaucracy, they say, will be stripped out. It'll make for a more centralised and streamlined service. Well, let's talk to someone who should know, Chris Hopson from NHS Providers. Chris, is it right to do any reorganisation in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, clearly, when you're coming out of a pandemic, reorganising things isn't ideal. But what we do need to understand is that the NHS has been trying to integrate health and care together for many, many years. And we've made some really good progress over the last 4, 5, 6 years in creating what are called integrated care systems at a local level. But the problem that we're facing is that the work that we're now doing is completely out of kilter with the 2012 Health and Care Act put through by Andrew Lansley. And the real problem we've got now is that you've got people on the ground who are operating at the edge of what is legal. And that is never, ever a comfortable place for anybody to be. So there is a very strong argument, and all of us in the NHS worked together in 2019 to create a set of proposals that would ensure that we actually have the law reflecting what is going on the ground. And for that reason, the bill is very important.
Right. And in terms of what it will do in centralising power, it will give more powers to the Health Secretary, for example.
Well, so I mentioned the 2019 work that all of us in the NHS did to come up with a set of proposals that we all agreed on. What's happened in the Health and Care Bill is the government have added some extra things onto those proposals. Some of them are helpful. So, for example, we do need to put the Healthcare Safety Investigation Board on a statutory basis. But what the government has also added in, or what I should say probably is the previous Secretary of State has added in, is the idea that effectively the Secretary of State should have considerably more powers of direction, both over key NHS bodies and the NHS, but also over local service reconfigurations. And that is something that concerns those of us who work in the NHS, because we're very clear. We must be accountable to elected politicians. And it's quite right that Secretaries of State should have the opportunity to set the strategic direction of the service. But what is very different is giving the Secretary of State power to determine determine, for example, how money can be allocated to particular parliamentary constituencies, giving them the ability to appoint political placemen in key NHS jobs, giving the Secretary of State the power to determine exactly which treatment should go ahead or not, and also giving the Secretary of State the power to effectively allocate contracts in a particular way. So strategic direction, yes. Day-to-day operational control, no. And therefore, what we will be doing is asking, as the bill goes through, can we find ways of putting in appropriate protections?
OK, well, Chris, stay with us while I open it up to the panel. What about the concerns you've just heard there, Mark? Too much power, too much centralisation to the Health Secretary if they can actually decide how money can be allocated to particular constituencies?
Well, I think two things. The central point that Chris set out there about what's the bill trying to do, which is to integrate health and care together, I think is very sensible. And actually, on the ground, I mean, it's been described as a reorganisation. As Chris said, a lot of areas are already operating like this. If I take my own area in Gloucestershire, our health and care bodies work very closely together. So, as he said, this is really putting them on a firmer footing. So I think that's very sensible. I've read the paper that he's produced about the concerns they've got. That will be dealt with in the normal way. As bills go through Parliament, you have a debate about
Do you have the same concerns?
Well, I've not been through the bill I've not been through it all in detail. I think there are some concerns they've raised. Those will no doubt be debated in the usual way. And I'm sure as the bill goes through, there will be amendments made to it in the usual way to reflect those concerns. And I'm sure the new Secretary of State will have views about it as well.
Yeah, indeed. Accountability, Layla. The public might think, actually, it's a good idea to blame the Health Secretary if things go wrong.
I think they do anyway. And I think it's also really interesting that Jeremy Hunt, in his interventions on this, has said that he never felt that he needed these powers. I would also point out that the two things during this pandemic that were directly managed by Hancock, which was PPE and test, trace, isolate, which he then sort of outsourced, went horrifically wrong. So I think we need to be very wary of giving ministers that level of power. It is a power grab, again, to the centre. But I also question, and this point around the capacity in the NHS to deliver this reorganisation, and it is a reorganisation, and I agree, there are parts of the country, and Oxfordshire is part of a country that has already started moving towards integrated services in the way that it's described. But then I was also talking to the same people who are trying to manage the backlogs that they're seeing in all of our trusts, who are also trying to manage some huge pressures that they're seeing on GP surgeries. And they were literally saying, I don't know where we're going to be able to get the people to be able to do this whilst dealing with all of these things at the same time. So I think there's an argument for delaying this. And instead, let's have that social care bill instead, because that is the big thing that is missing from this. And it's the huge elephant in the room that all of this would be made better with, and it's still as yet promised and yet not delivered by government.
Will this work well, Melanie, for the NHS going forward?
Well, I think, first of all, it is absolutely the wrong time for the reasons that have been said in the middle of a pandemic when the NHS is clearly struggling and going to struggle heroically and terribly with its backlog. But I mean, you know, we've been through this before over the decades. I mean, this is simply yet another rearrangement of the deck chairs on the NHS Titanic, I'm afraid. I mean, over the decades, you've had reorganisation after reorganisation in the NHS. First of all, it's become more centralised. Then that's deemed to be a complete disaster, and it's become more localised. That was deemed to be a disaster, and it's become more centralised again. The fact is that the NHS has not had a good pandemic. The people working in it, the health workers, have been absolutely beyond heroic. But the structure itself showed itself to be too big, too unwieldy, too unresponsive, and fell down on the job that it was asked to do in many respects. We've already heard about test and trace and PPE and so on. My own view, and I've expressed this many times, is that there is something fundamentally wrong with the NHS model itself. It's always presented in Britain as an argument between, on the one hand, socialised healthcare, NHS, wonderful, you look after everybody according to need. On the other hand, you have the nightmare of American private medicine and leaving the poor to die in a gutter. In my view, there is an alternative. It's found in Europe. It's called social health insurance. And people buy into health insurance providers who compete with each other, as a result of which everybody is covered at a minimum standard, which is higher than in the NHS. Why don't we ever really consider the real revolution that should be happening in healthcare?
Well, that's very clear. Rachel, respond to what Melanie is proposing.
I would like her to point to where the public support is for that kind of model, and on what basis does she believe that the NHS has had a terrible pandemic. That's certainly not how most of the public seem to feel about it at all. And just thinking about the bill itself, the new Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, apparently, according to some reports, he absolutely did want to delay this, but was overruled by Boris Johnson, because these are proposals that were drawn up by his predecessor, Matt Hancock. And while there are a lot of measures in the bill that a lot of people seem to support, which would be the more integrated care at a local level, there are a lot of people raising concerns about why there are these new powers for the Secretary of State to intervene at a local level. I mean, the Health Foundation says that it's a politically driven initiative and there's no clear rationale for it. And the the Nuffield Trust Health think tank just thinks it will lead to worse decisions.
Right. I mean, Mark, listening to what Melanie was saying about the fact that the NHS has had a bad pandemic, she says, and Rachel and Layla would obviously disagree with that. But the distinction between the structure of the NHS and the people and the medical staff that work within it, do you agree with her in any way?
No, I don't. And I don't agree with her contention that the NHS has had a bad pandemic. Actually, I think the NHS has worked really well. And I mean, actually, one of the strengths of it, if you look about how we delivered the vaccination rollout, is the NHS stepped up and delivered a fantastic vaccination rollout across all 4 parts of the United Kingdom, working in tandem. So I think actually that's worked really well. Are there problems? Yes, of course there are. And part of the reason for making changes is you look at how things are working. We know we need to bring health and care more closely together. And that's what this bill is trying to do. And I think it's that core purpose is very sensible.
Right. Well, let's go back to Chris, who I think is still sitting there listening patiently. Chris, one of the issues I wanted to raise with you is the backlog. I think Layla talked about it. The figures that I have here is something like 5.3 million people waiting for routine operations, which in itself is a record in England, and that could rise to 13 million. This is according to the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid. How will the NHS ever be able to deal with that?
Well, we know it's been an unprecedented period over the last 16 months. And thank you, Mark, for recognising that the NHS, and also thank you, Rachel, for recognising that the NHS has done an extraordinary job. I mean, if you think about the amount of work those frontline staff have had to do, putting off leave, working all hours of the day, doing extra shifts, to do some extraordinary things in terms of preventing loss of life, developing extra treatments. And as Mark said, the vaccine programme, absolutely kind of spot on. But unfortunately, one of the problems is that we haven't been able to do everything, and therefore we have got these kind of care backlogs building up. I mean, we are going completely full pelt at trying to recover those backlogs, and actually we're doing pretty well at that. We've actually exceeded the targets that we were set in terms of recovering levels of activity, but this is going to be a 2 or 3 year task, and I think it's very clear to us that this will be one of the dominant political issues of the rest of the Parliament, is what is the best way and how much money is needed to actually recover these backlogs, because very significant.
Yes, oh, indeed. Chris, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to show our viewers and tell our guests this headline in the Guardian newspaper for our next discussion. Tory MP says party must change attitude towards taking the knee. The Tory MP in question is the influential Steve Baker. He is a former minister, and he has said that his party needs to think again about dismissive attitudes towards the taking of the knee and calling for better understanding of the motives behind it. Let's talk to Albi Amankona, who is a Conservative activist and co-founder with Steve Baker, I understand, of Conservatives Against Racism for Equality. Welcome to you, Albi. Why has the Conservative Party got this wrong over their reaction, some of them, to taking the knee?
As I said in my letter that was sent to 2 major MP WhatsApp groups last night, that there has really been a fundamental misunderstanding of why the England football team and Gareth Southgate and many other people and all the people at the protest last year, indeed, were taking the knee. And that really has been very evident for longer than just the length of the football tournament. But when we have heard Conservative MPs talking about why people are taking the knee, they always conflate it with Black Lives Matter and Marxism and being anti-capitalist and being anti-British, anti-police, defunding the police, anti-institution, all of these things, which it is absolutely right that Conservatives should be against. And I am against all of those things. But what people have said about why they're taking the knee, for allies of anti-racists, they've said it is a stand in solidarity with people who have suffered from racism and to show that they are themselves anti-racist. And for non-white people like myself, it is a stand against the racism that we have received in our lives. And indeed, it was the footballers taking a stand against the racism that they've received throughout the match, throughout their careers, and also from their very own people after the tournament has ended, where it was through their hard work that we got the best result since 1966. So there's been a fundamental misunderstanding, and that understanding, it needs to change.
Right, so you feel that Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, although she says she's fighting racism, she's experienced racism herself, can't make that distinction between her beliefs against racism and seeing taking the knee as gesture politics?
I think it has been difficult for many people on our side of the House to see the distinction between the very good and proper reasons as to why footballers take the knee and their supporters agree with them taking the knee, and unfortunately some of the stranger views of some of the Black Lives Matter organisations, which I don't agree with at all. And I think it's been difficult for people to see that distinction. But I think when footballers and supporters of taking the knee come out and say why they are taking the knee, we have to listen to what they're saying, believe what they're saying is true, and then maybe alter the way that we talk about things a little bit to reflect that.
Right, well, Mark, it's quite simple, isn't it, listening to what Albie has been saying. Why have ministers got this wrong?
Well, I listened very carefully to what he said and what Steve Baker said this morning, and I don't think it's very complicated. I mean, first of all, what the England footballers did, they explained very clearly what they were doing and why they were doing it, which was to make a very clear stand against racism, both in football and in society. I support them making that stand, and I don't think any fan should boo them or criticise them for doing so. Right. I think they set a very good example.
Is it a decisive moment for the party, for the Conservative Party, in the way your colleague Steve Baker has said in their reaction to it?
I think the point that Albie set out very clearly is the Black Lives Matter organisation, which campaigns to defund the police and so forth, taking the knee has been associated with that. And that, I think, is why, for a lot of people, they have a problem with it. So I think that's why it's confusing. But I think he set out very clearly he doesn't support the Black Lives Matter movement or the organisation and the things it
But as he said, the England football team made it very clear.
No, they did.
So what I'm saying is...
I just said the England football team made it very clear why they were doing what they were doing.
So why, Steve, think it's a decisive moment for the party and their dismissive attitudes, as he called it, towards the taking of the knee?
Well, I think it's about what we're having here and what Albie said. It's about having a sensible, grown-up conversation about being clear about why those England footballers were doing what they were doing. They were clear about what they were doing. Right. Gareth Southgate set it out in his essay, and a number of the footballers have eloquently explained it themselves.
Sure, but what about ministers like Gillian Keegan, who said it was people were perfectly free to take the knee, but symbolism, for her, it meant symbolism more than action. And Priti Patel, as I've said, who talked about it in terms of gesture politics.
Well, look, as far as the Home Secretary is concerned, me as a white man, I'm not going to tell the Home Secretary, who is of Indian descent herself and who has set out in the House of Commons what appalling racist abuse she has felt. I'm not going to lecture her.
Has she got it wrong when it comes to her response to taking the knee?
I am not going to tell the Home Secretary how to deal with the racist that she's had to confront in her life. I think that, frankly, would be ridiculous for me to do so. I've set out very clearly the strong example that the England footballers set, and I agree with Albie. They both set a very good example on the pitch, getting our best result for the whole of my lifetime, but they also set a very good example off, in terms of what they say about getting racism out of society. And I think that's a very good role model for lots of young people around the country.
Right. Layla, do you agree with Mark and, to some extent, Albie, that people have to be free to make up their own minds and to come up with their own definitions?
Yes, but I also agree with what Albie was saying, was that the start of all of that needs to be actually listening. So rather than just dismiss something out of hand, quite often, because it suits the current Conservative Party to stoke up a culture war, it's helpful and it's part of their narrative to say, here are this group of people who are raising all these concerns in society, and actually these concerns are either not valid or we are doing things about them, and it's a way of playing this sort of one side of society off another. Taking the knee became part of that in the way that the Prime Minister, that Priti Patel specifically, but also Gillian Keegan and others were talking about it. It's just gesture politics. It also means these things that are extremely extreme. And as a supporter of taking the knee, and absolutely someone who wants racism eradicated from our country, actually that's most people who think that this is a good thing to do. Most people in this country now appreciate what it is. And it's nearly 80% of people of black and minority ethnic background agree that taking the knee is an important, and it's not just a gesture, it is a signal to government that something is deeply wrong in our society. We've got systemic racism and they need to do something about it. But if they dismiss it before they've even properly had those conversations, then that is always going to lead to the wrong response. And my view is Priti Patel should actually apologise for the way that she's approached this, because she is the Home Secretary. She's not just an individual. And she's saying that she's dealing with these things systematically in society. Well, she isn't.
Right. Well, Melanie, should she apologise, Priti Patel? The accusation also that she's given licence to some of the racism that came out after the final.
I think this whole way of talking about what's happened is absolutely appalling and disgusting. This idea that one has to sort of prove one's moral virtue in this rather Soviet way. I mean, the fact is, you know, there is a problem of racism. The racist abuse suffered by these England footballers was truly appalling, although as I read, much of it came from abroad. And there is a problem, a serious problem of racism in sport, which has not been eradicated. And I've absolutely no doubt that those footballers in the England squad who took the knee were doing so purely, as has been said, to make a point about racism in society. But I'm afraid that simply isn't good enough. People do things for a variety of good motives, but they nevertheless can be bad things. The fact is that this gesture of taking the knee didn't actually arise with Black Lives Matter. It arose out of an American footballer called Colin Kaepernick, said he refused to stand to honour his country during its national anthem because it was racist. This gesture was then taken up by Black Lives Matter, which is a fundamentally anti-white, anti-West, anti-Jew organisation. And the whole shtick of Black Lives Matter is that Britain is, as Layla Moran has said, systematically racist. Now, that is a libel on Britain. It is a racial libel on Britain. It is a deeply racist statement. To take the knee in support of this is a racist, anti-white statement. That is why it should be condemned.
OK, well, Layla, you want to respond?
Utter rubbish. And anyone who supports that it is a gesture, it is a thing that you are doing to raise a deeper issue. But to suggest that it is devoid of substance behind it, all those experiences, it's not just about racism in football, it's about racism against a lot of minority groups in this country who suffer this day in, day out, and who don't have that platform to be able to raise it in the public. But it was never about, and Gareth Southgate in his letter, in his op-ed, where he explained that is where I and others, that is where we all are. It could be taking the knee, it could be something else, but fundamentally we want to tackle the in-depth racism that exists in the structures of our country. We need to accept that they exist, and we need to do something about it. Melanie, if you don't want to take the knee, then don't. But what this became about was, do we boo people who do?
To illustrate
and I don't think we should.
Right. Well,
would you support that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Would you support making the Black Power gesture, the raised fist, on the basis that all you were doing was raising the issue of anti-racism, and regardless of what the Black Power movement stood for? Would you do that?
All right,
would
well,
you support the England team
answer.
making the Black Power
that
gesture?
question, and then I want to go back to Albie.
The Black Power gesture, in a time when I wasn't born, I don't know what I would have done then. What I do know is I would take the knee, because what we're talking about now is a movement that is very definitely linked to people who want to tackle the systemic racism that we see across the whole of our country and indeed in other countries too.
All right, well, hang on.
That is a good thing, surely.
All right, hang on, Melanie, because, Rachel, I will come to you, but I want to get Albie's response to what he's heard, because clearly, as you have heard, this is a very divisive issue.
just want to diffuse the situation a little bit, actually, because people do get quite hot and bothered by this issue of taking the knee. But actually, Melanie, you're wrong with its origins. It did not originate with Colin Kaepernick. It actually originated with the pacifist campaigner Martin Luther King back in the 1960s, when actually he would take the knee to pray and reflect on the peaceful protests during the civil rights movement. So, I mean, your assessment of that is actually just factually wrong, although it is right to say that Colin Kaepernick popularised the move in the 21st century, if you will. And so it's important to understand the origins of the gesture, and I don't think any of us can disagree that Martin Luther King was a peaceful pacifist who changed the world. And I think that is all that people who are supporters of taking the knee want to do now. Now, no one is telling anyone you have to take the knee. All that we are saying, all that our supporters are saying is, please don't condemn people who choose to take the knee to take a stand against the racism that they see their colleagues face, or to take a stand against the racism that they receive themselves. That's it.
Melanie, you were trying to come in. Do you accept the origins there?
No. Well, he may be right about Martin Luther King kneeling for different reasons, but Martin Luther King's core message was to judge people by the content of their character and not by the colour of their skin. The Black Lives Matter movement, this idea that the West, that Britain is systematically racist, damns people on the basis of the colour of their skin. That is why it is a deeply racist set of beliefs.
All right, I've got to get Rachel in before Prime Minister's questions. Rachel.
I was just going to make the point that this gesture, it was the choice of the young people of colour who are playing for our national team in our national sport, and it fell to the FA actually to point out, rather than any political leader, that the players were doing this because they felt this gesture had origins as far back as the 18th century, actually. And I just feel like if we ignore their choice of gesture, we're ignoring their experiences. And this is our national sport, and we've failed, I think, and I think a lot of people would agree, to take a very united stance on racism. And this was a missed opportunity. We might not get another opportunity like this for generations, given how well this England team has done.
Mark?
Well, I don't agree with that. Hopefully we'll get a chance, actually, when the England team does really well in the World Cup, hopefully. But no, I don't agree with that. I think Alba's letter, actually, I've read it, and I think it's an excellent letter. And I think what it really encourages us to do is have some sensible, calm, reasonable conversations on this subject. And I think the more of that, the better.
Albi, thank you very much. We've got to go to Prime Minister's questions.
May not have been the one we were all hoping for. I know that the whole House will want to congratulate Gareth Southgate and the England squad for their fantastic achievements over the last month. The nation is proud of each and every one of them. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I second the Prime Minister's support for our outstanding England team and players, but perhaps say that it's a pity it didn't come sooner from him and We all know the importance of double vaccination, especially against the Delta or Johnson variant of the virus. But in Hammersmith and Fulham, despite the hard work of our local NHS council and volunteers, only 36% of adults have been double jabbed. So will the Prime Minister think again before recklessly removing all barriers to infection and transmission on the 19th of January? Will he keep the regulations on mask wearing and, like the Mayor of London, keep fighting the virus until it's beat?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we had followed the honourable gentleman's precepts, and I remember, of course, he campaigned vehemently to stay in the European Union, we would not have achieved the fastest vaccine rollout of any European country and have vaccinated the highest proportion of any European population, Mr. Speaker. That is the reality. And as for his criticism of the roadmap, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully point out to the honourable gentleman the month is July, not January, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, it should be obvious that the Cabinet is as inclusive as the English football team, and some of these criticisms, I think, are misplaced. Can I welcome, Mr. Speaker, your words at the beginning of Tuesday's debate and the Prime Minister's first paragraph on the Treasury Minute from Monday, can we agree that a vote in this House does not amend an Act of Parliament passed by both Houses? Are we expecting a similar debate in another place? And can I suggest to the Prime Minister that instead of leaping from point 5 to point 7 at some stage in the future, we step towards it, because a 40% increase in 1 year is ludicrous, and perhaps the Chancellor can consider going to 5.5, 6, 6.5 and then 7. Thank you.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, very much for his opening point. And just on on odour, of course, I can give him this reassurance. We will continue to follow the law, and he will have heard clearly what both my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, had to say from this dispatch box, and what I said as well. We want to return to point 7 as fast as we can, when fiscal conditions allow.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking the England football team for everything they've given this country over the last 6 weeks. I'm so proud of this young, diverse and humble team and everything that it represents. Mr. Speaker, they're the very best of modern Britain, everything that I know this country can be. Does the Prime Minister think that it was wrong to criticise the England team's decision to oppose racism by taking the knee as gesture politics?
I agree very much with what the right honourable gentleman has said about the England team. And I repeat, I want to thank each and every one of them for what they did, their incredible campaign they ran in the Euro 2020 Championships. And they do represent the very best of our country. And I repeat that I utterly condemn and abhor the racist outpourings that we saw on Sunday night. And so what we're doing is today taking practical steps to ensure that the football banning order regime is changed, so that if you are guilty, Mr. Speaker, of racist abuse online of footballers, then you will not be going to the match. No ifs, no buts, no exemptions and no excuses.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, that just won't wash. And it rings hollow. On the 7th, remind the Prime Minister and the House, on the 7th of June, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said this: on taking the knee, specifically, the Prime Minister is more focused on actions rather than gestures. On the 14th of June, the Home Secretary said, I just don't support people participating in that type of gesture politics. The Conservative MP for Bassetlaw called it a ridiculous, empty gesture. So there's no point of pretending that these things weren't said. The England footballer, Tyrone Mings, said that Labour Party member I hear shouted out. Is that really the response? Is that it? Tyrone Mings said, and the House might want to listen, he said this: labelling anti-racism messages as gesture politics serve to stoke the fire of racism and hatred. Prime Minister, they're powerful words from someone who has himself been subjected to racist abuse. He's right, isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate our total support for our fantastic England team, and I support them in the way that they show solidarity with their friends who face racism, Mr. Speaker. But when he talks about the Home Secretary, let me just remind him that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has faced racism and prejudice all her career of a kind that he can never imagine, and she has taken practical steps to get black and minority officers into the police in record numbers. In fact, Prime Speaker, I am...
Sorry to interrupt you. I want to hear the Prime Minister. If his own side don't want to hear him, I'm sure the tea room will accommodate them. It's very important to listen to what the Prime Minister's got to say. Have you finished, Prime Minister? Are you OK? Yeah. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I totally condemn all racism, including that directed at the Home Secretary. But she's got this wrong. The whole country knows it. His own MPs know it. In the last few days, everybody has seen England's black players have been the targets of disgusting racist abuse following Sunday's match. Disgusting. And this is really simple, Mr. Speaker. Either the Prime Minister is with the England players in their stand against racism, or he can defend his own record, those of his ministers and some of his MPs. But he can't have it both ways. So can he tell the House, does he now regret failing to condemn those who booed England players for standing up to racism, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, we made it absolutely clear that no one should boo the England team. And Mr. Speaker, what we're doing now is following the racist abuse that our players sadly suffered on Sunday night and thereafter, we're taking practical action. So in addition to changing the football banning order regime, last night I met representatives of Facebook, of Twitter, of TikTok, of Snapchat, of Instagram, and I made it absolutely clear to them that we will legislate to address this problem, Mr. Speaker, in the online harms bill, and unless they get hate and racism off their platforms, they will face fines amounting to 10% of their global revenues, and we all know, Mr. Speaker, that they have the technology to do it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the online harms bill has been promised for 3 years. I'm not sure a 15-minute chat at a garden party moves things forward that significantly. But I want to take the Prime Minister up on what he said about being absolutely clear, because here I have the headline, Mr. Speaker: Boris Johnson refuses to condemn fans booing England taking the knee. That's the story, that's the headline, June the 6th. Boris Johnson refuses to condemn fans booing England taking the knee. That's absolutely clear. It's not quite what the Prime Minister is implying today. It goes on to quote the Prime Minister's spokesperson, saying that the Prime Minister fully respects the rights of those who choose to make their feelings known. This is about booing. Fully respects their rights. And the Home Secretary said that booing was a choice for them, quite frankly. So no condemnation there, no absolute clarity there, Mr. Speaker. When senior government ministers and Conservative MPs defend the booing of an anti-racist message, who do they think they're defending, Prime Minister, and why are they defending it?
Mr. Speaker, nobody defends booing of the England side. Nobody defends booing of the England side. And if he continues to attack the Home Secretary...
Prime Minister, look, I want to hear the Prime Minister. I want to know the answer, and I expect the opposition to listen to the answer. Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We love and admire the England side and what they did. They represent the best of our country. Nobody defends booing the England side, Mr. Speaker. But what the Home Secretary has been trying to do all her life is not just to fight racism, but to take practical steps to advance the cause of black and minority ethnic groups, which she has done successfully, notably in the police. And since, Mr. Speaker, he's chucking this kind of thing around, could I ask him now to retract this leaflet produced by the Labour Party during the Batley and Spen by-election, which was condemned by his own MPs as dog whistle racism, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister isn't kidding anyone in this House. He's not kidding the public, and he's not even kidding his own MPs. Let me quote the Conservative MP for Plymouth Moor View. Conservative MP: the painful truth, says the Conservative MP for Plymouth Moor View, is that Tyrone Mings is completely right. I am very uncomfortable, he says, with the position we Conservatives are needlessly forcing ourselves into. So, Prime Minister, behind you they don't believe you, and neither do we. Mr. Speaker, we can all see what's happened here. The government has been trying to stoke a culture war, and they've realised they're on the wrong side. And now they hope that nobody's noticed. Why else would a Conservative MP boast that he's not watching his own team? Why else would another Conservative MP say that Marcus Rashford spends too much time playing politics when he's actually trying to feed children that the government won't? And why will the Prime Minister refuse time and time again, even now, to condemn those who boo our players for standing up against racism? Mr. Speaker, what is it that this England team symbolises that this Conservative Party is so afraid of?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the House will judge for themselves the quality of the question that the right honourable gentleman has just put. I think the whole House is united, including our distinguished members from Scotland, by the way, Mr. Speaker, in admiration of the England team and of every single member of that squad and what they did. And we stick up for them, Mr. Speaker. And what we're doing is taking practical steps to fight racism, changing the football banning order regime, fining the online companies. And by the way, we will use more legislation if we have to, just as we use the threat of legislation, Mr. Speaker, to stop the European Super League. And we will get on. We will get on with delivering for the people of this country. We will get on with vaccinating the people of this country while they continue to vacillate. We will continue to immunise the people of this country while they improvise and dart around. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to engage in a political culture war of any kind. I want to get on with delivering for the people of this country. He simply wants to get on with dithering.
Keir Starmer.
He doesn't want to engage in a culture war and point scoring. Give me a break. Football's a game. Racism isn't, Prime Minister. That's why many of us have been involved in the charity Show Racism the Red Card for years. But far from giving racism the red card, the Prime Minister gave it the green light. And I'll tell you the worst kind of gesture politics, Mr. Speaker, putting an England shirt on over a shirt and tie whilst not condemning those booing is the worst kind of gesture. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister, finally, about the reported amnesty for crimes committed during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I worked in Northern Ireland for 6 years with the Policing Board and the police. I've also prosecuted terrorists as the Director of Public Prosecutions, so I know how difficult and how sensitive this is. But a blanket amnesty, including for terrorists, is plain wrong. I was in Northern Ireland last week, and it's absolutely clear that the government's amnesty is not supported by the political parties in Northern Ireland, and it's not supported by victims groups. Last Thursday, I spoke to victims of terrorism at the Wave Trauma Centre in North Belfast. Mr. Speaker, they haven't even been properly consulted on this proposal. If things are to move forward in Northern Ireland, any discussion has to start with the victims. Politicians in London can't simply draw a line under terrorism and other crimes and then force it on those most affected. The Prime Minister looks up, so let him look up and let him hear. Because I want to quote Julie Hambleton, Prime Minister. Her sister Maxine was among the 21 people killed by the IRA in the Birmingham pub bombings. So that's Julie Hambleton, Prime Minister. She says, tell me, Prime Minister, if one of your loved ones was blown up beyond recognition, where you were only able to identify your son or daughter by their fingernails, would you be so quick to grant their murderers an amnesty and propose such obscene legislation? What does the Prime Minister have to say to Julie, and she's listening, and other victims like her?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the whole House will acknowledge the suffering of victims like Julie and their families. And, of course, nothing I say or can do now can in any way mitigate her loss, and that is clear. But it is also true that the people of Northern Ireland must, if we possibly can allow them to, they must move forwards now. And he will know that the proposals that are being brought forward, and the House will hear about them in more detail later on from my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. The proposals that are being brought forward are measured, they are balanced, and they have a wide degree of support, I may say, from former Labour Prime Ministers and former Labour leaders who I think are of considerable more distinction, I may say, than the right honourable gentleman opposite. And he will recall that it was under that Labour administration that many terrorists were unfortunately given effectively an amnesty, and they were allowed to escape the full consequences of their crimes, as he knows very well, and that is the reality. Whilst the sad fact remains that, and this is of course no consolation to people like Julie, but the sad fact remains that there are many members of the armed services who continue to face the threat of vexatious prosecutions well into their 70s and 80s and later. And we are finally, Mr. Speaker, bringing forward a solution to this problem, to enable the province of Northern Ireland to draw a line under the Troubles, to enable the people of Northern Ireland to move forward. And I think someone with greater statesmanship and clarity of vision would have seen that, Mr. Speaker, and given these proposals a fair wind.
Bell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the scandalous situation at Wally's Quarry landfill in my constituency with the noxious gas emissions is, I'm afraid, continuing. To date, there's been no apology from the operator, Red Industries, and no credible explanation for the odour that is blighting the lives and the health of so many of my residents. So what assurances can the Prime Minister give me today that every effort will be made to speed up the works that have been mandated by the Environment Agency, that we will get a deadline as to when we can expect this awful situation to be resolved, and that those responsible are held fully to account?
Stop the sting. Mr. Speaker, I yield to no one in my admiration for the Environment Agency, but in this case, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend because they are not, in my view, sorting this problem out fast enough. I am fed up with this being raised with me. We must stop the stink, and I want the air around Wally's Quarry to be of alpine freshness before too long.
Ian Blackford, the SNP leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by congratulating the England team for reaching the final, an incredible achievement. But the tragedy of the tournament was the undercurrent of racism that was ultimately targeted at 3 young men, Rashford, Sancho and Saka. Mr. Speaker, wherever there is racism, it falls on all of us to face it down and to call it out. And it is shameful that it took until last night for the Prime Minister to meet with the main social media companies and finally wake up to the fact that those who publish and promote vile, racist online abuse need to be faced down and sanctioned. So, can the Prime Minister tell us what sanctions he thinks would be appropriate for someone who publishes racist content? And it is shocking even to have to say this out loud, describing Africans as flag-waving piccaninnies with watermelon smiles.
Shameful. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've commented many times about the words that I've said in the past, and I think the House understands how. And I think the House understands how you can take things out of context, Mr. Speaker. What I think people do understand that, but what they also understand is that there is a chance now to hold these internet companies to account and to make sure that they face fines running to 10% of their global income if they fail to take hate and racism off their platforms, Mr. Speaker. And I hope, actually, that the Scottish Nationalist Party will support it.
Ian Blackford.
You know, still no contrition, still no apology. And, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that the Tory party doesn't sanction those who publish that kind of racist content. They promote them to be Prime Minister. The legacy of this Prime Minister's dog whistling has followed him into 10 Downing Street, and it is now at the heart of this Tory government. As the England International Tyrone Mings has so powerfully stated, this government doesn't get to stoke the fires of racism and pretend to be disgusted when it happens. They don't get to condemn the racism of others, but deny that the racism that they have even provoked. In March, this UK government's own report on racism, the Sewell report, said that there was no systemic problem in the UK. I think the England men's football team would beg to differ. After the shocking racism on show over the last week, does the Prime Minister still stand by his government's belief that systemic racism is not a problem that exists in the United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, I do think that racism is a problem in the United Kingdom, and I believe it needs to be tackled and it needs to be stamped out with some of the means that I've described this morning. But when he attacks our party, my party, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's got the wrong target. This is a party that has not only had the first ever Muslim Secretary of State for Health, now he was former Chancellor, of course, but has had 2 female Prime Ministers, the most diverse cabinet in the history of this country, the most diverse government in the history of this country, Mr. Speaker. We are the party. If you are a young person growing up in a black or ethnic minority group in this country, we are the party that represent hope and opportunity. That is the reality about the Conservative Party today.
Julian Marston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is packed full of incredible innovation-led businesses capable of leading entire industries, not least in Hertford and Stortford, where we are at the heart of the innovation corridor. I know this government wants to ensure the best possible access to venture funding over multiple rounds to catapult scale-up businesses full of potential into world-beating companies. Would the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how we can best make venture work for the scale-up community and transform some of our best ideas into some of the world's biggest businesses?
I thank the honourable lady, and she knows a lot about what the subject that she mentions. This is a fantastic opportunity for this country because we do indeed produce a great many tech breakthroughs, and we're looking very much at how to make sure that we scale up fast. But don't let her forget that as I speak, there are 3 countries in the world, Mr. Speaker, that have scaled up tech breakthroughs to unicorns worth more than £1 billion, 100 unicorns worth more than £1 billion. Only 3 countries have 100 unicorns. They are the United States of America, China and the United Kingdom.
Ms. Savile-Roberts.
For over 7 years, Plaid Cymru has been calling for the gargantuan HS2 railway to be treated as an England-only project so that Wales gets our fair share. Not a single inch of track will be in Wales, but we're footing the bill. Today, the Welsh Affairs Committee backed our call, calling the UK government's categorisation of HS2 in relation to Wales as unfair and biased. Will the Prime Minister today right this wrong, respect the Welsh Affairs Select Committee and ensure that Wales, like Scotland, receives our fair share from HS2?
I normally have a great deal of respect and interest in what the honourable lady says, but actually in this case she's missed what the government is doing for transport connectivity in Wales and to Wales, something about which I know that she's as passionate as I am. Look at what we're doing in the Union Connectivity Review with the A55, with the North Wales Railway corridor into Liverpool, and look at the M4, Mr. Speaker. Never let it be forgotten that it was the Welsh Labour government, not her fault, of course, because she's plied, but it was the Welsh Labour government, Mr. Speaker, that spent £144 million on a study, and then didn't even do the diversion.
Let's go to Dr. Matthew Offord. Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The circumstances of Jewish burials around the world is a sensitive and important issue to my constituents, and as such to me. In January 1942, the Nazis built 2 concentration camps on British soil on the island of Alderney. Conditions were appalling, with multiple deaths. However, there are just 397 recorded graves in Alderney, just 6.6% of a total population of 6,000 internees. In 1961, a British delegation undertook an inquiry into these atrocities that occurred on Alderney. Today, I ask the Prime Minister to authorise the release of all documents and information residing in the archives into those investigations so we know what happened to thousands of people on the island of Alderney during World War II. To quote Elie Wiesel, to forget the dead will be akin to killing them again.
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point about the victims on Alderney. We must never forget the suffering of those who, on the Channel Islands, who suffered under occupation between 1940 and 1945. I'm told that the documents in question have been transferred to the National Archives, Mr. Speaker, but I will make sure that the relevant minister meets my honourable friend to discuss the matter further.
Peter Kyle.
Mr. Speaker, there are currently 800,000 students self-isolating, and even after the reforms to the bubbling system, the government's failure to get the Delta variant under control means that infections rising over the summer will mean that the autumn term will be very severely affected in our schools. If the JCVI says that it is safe and appropriate for adolescents to receive the vaccine, will the Prime Minister promise that every single adolescent will be offered the vaccine over the summer and parents given all the information they need to make an informed decision so that schools can return and not continue to be affected by the bad policy making of this government and the failure to get the Delta variant under control?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman seems to want us to relax our rules on protecting people from coronavirus. I don't think that's the right thing to do at this time on self-isolation. And he also calls for us to go against the JCVI, and that is a matter, Mr. Speaker, for the JCVI.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the economy rebounding and a great many job vacancies currently available, does my right honourable friend agree that there's a tremendous opportunity emerging now to build a stronger British labour market post-Brexit and post-COVID, and that we need to help employers create jobs with better pay, more security, more opportunity for skills and career progression? Isn't that one of the keys for levelling up and ending the blight of in-work poverty?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend, and I know how much he cares about them, and that's one of the reasons why we're not only rolling out our massive plan for jobs, but why I'm proud that under this government we've increased the national living wage by a record amount to £8.91 per hour.
Let's go to Peter Grant. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The communities of Leslie, Markinch, Echuca, Thornton, Woodside and East Weems in my constituency are all either losing or have already lost their post offices since 2019. In addition, constituents in Coltner, Balgony, Windigates, Cadham, Methil, Buckhaven and Methil Hill have all had the disruption of temporary closures or relocations, and the post office at Glenwood is currently closed until further notice. Given that the post office is 100% owned by his government, what exactly does it take for him to admit that the current trading model for the post office is not working for the people that rely on its services?
Mr. Speaker, the treatment of the post office, the masters, the sub-post masters in the recent computer malfunction was, I'm afraid, appalling, and I've made that clear. When it comes to protecting and supporting post offices, particularly rural post offices, but I think is what he was driving at. This government will do everything it can to protect them.
Let's go to Angela Richardson. Angela.
Mr. Speaker, too noisy, too much air pollution, and too much time wasted sitting in traffic, impacting productivity. The A3, as it narrows through Guildford, has been the cause of frustration for decades. According to Highways England, there are no more sticking plasters, which is why I'm calling for the A3 to be tunnelled under Guildford. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that as we build back better after the pandemic, investment into major road infrastructure solutions will be an important part of delivering on the levelling up agenda right across the whole country?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I know the stretch of road that she refers to very well, as I'm sure many members across this House do as well. I would love to be able to clip my fingers and say that we could tunnel under Guildford. All I can say is, Mr. Speaker, in all candor, we will certainly look at it. But honourable members should be in no doubt that we're spending record sums, £27 billion on improving England's strategic roads, part of a £640 billion biggest and best ever package of infrastructure investment in this country.
Let's go to Howell Williams. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many people are aghast at the potential consequences of thrashing English COVID regulations in a triumphalist prime ministerial crash attack. Wales's regulations, to be announced today, are expected to take a cautious and measured approach. Will the Prime Minister make it clear that those visiting Wales this summer must stick to Welsh laws, and that on COVID regulations, he can only speak for England?
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. And I think that people should stick to the the rules and the guidance wherever they are, and I think he's absolutely right to talk about a cautious and a measured approach.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have seen that 2 recently published Government Commission reports, mine into competition policy and the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform, both make the same 2 recommendations to inject fresh energy into our better regulation regime so we can deliver our Brexit ambition of replacing ponderous EU regulations with simpler, digital and less burdensome UK equivalents without reducing quality standards in the process. So, will he take this opportunity to unleash a big post-Brexit better regulation dividend by declaring his enthusiastic support for a strong new 1-in, 2-out regime with no loopholes or exceptions right here today?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think it is obvious that the UK has a massive amount to gain, not just from his report, which I much enjoyed, as I told him I thought was excellent, but also from the TIGA report, the Task Force on reducing regulation, and I thank them for that, and they'll be seeing, he and they will be seeing a lot more in the next few weeks.
Let's go to John Nicholson. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Yesterday, at the Prime Minister's instigation, 333 Conservative members of this House, including some of its wealthiest, voted to deprive some of the world's poorest children of clean water. Education for girls programmes we guaranteed will be slashed. Polio eradication schemes too. Most people go into politics to make the world a better place, but the Prime Minister seems to be an exception. As he reads of the anguish his decision has caused, and as the father of a young child, doesn't he feel the merest hint of shame?
Mr. Speaker, I think the people of this entire country should be immensely proud of what the UK is doing abroad, whether it is educating millions of girls with an increase to support for female education, whether it is helping the countries around the world to tackle climate change with £11.6 billion of investment, or helping refugees in Yemen or Syria or Ethiopia with £900 million. We're spending £10 billion a year on overseas aid alone, Mr. Speaker, to say nothing of what we're doing with vaccines. The whole country should be immensely proud of what the UK is doing in spite of this pandemic.
Let's go to Faye Jones. Faye.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will know the Green Man Festival, which is an incredibly popular international music event, which takes place in Crickhowell in my constituency. The festival organisers have gone to great lengths to ensure the event is COVID secure, but the Welsh Government refuses to give them the green light to go ahead as a test event, unlike similar events in England. So will my right honourable friend help us by giving the Green Man Festival his full support and encourage the Welsh Government to get behind the festival at long last?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I haven't been invited to attend the Green Man Festival, but it sounds great. She's obviously my honourable friend's obviously a big fan. I will do what I can to pass her message along. I thank her for campaigning for Wales and for the Green Man Festival.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Jackie Davis was diagnosed with a type of blood cancer in April, which prevents her immune system from developing antibodies against COVID. Jackie wants to live as normal a life as possible and to do everyday things like going shopping, but she's terrified and she thinks that the rapid lifting of restrictions on Monday is putting her at risk. With the Delta variant about to spike due to the government's decision to lift restrictions, particularly the requirement to wear masks in public places, what's his message to people in Jackie's situation? Will he rethink his reckless gamble of lifting all these restrictions on Monday? And yes, Jackie did support staying in the EU.
Well, my message I'm sorry, obviously, for the condition that Jackie suffers, and I think that the Labour Party obviously needs to work out whether it's in favour of going ahead with step 4 or not, because it's not at all clear from what he has said or what the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition, has said. They don't have a clue, Mr. Speaker. But what I can say to him is that we expect and recommend everybody, and I say this to Jackie, we expect and recommend everybody to wear a face covering in a confined space where you're meeting people you don't normally meet, and that is quite right.
Final question, Nikki Aiken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I met with the Reading Agency that is about to launch its annual Summer Reading Challenge and hopes to reach 1 million children, primary school children, this year. What a great excuse to go to one of our brilliant libraries and take part in the COVID education catch-up. With this in mind, would my right honourable friend join me in encouraging every child across the nation to take part in the Summer Reading Challenge, pick up a book and read back better?
Yes.
Yes.
I thank my honour. She's quite right, and there couldn't be a better campaign. For the summer, we put 1.9 million of support into the reading scheme that she mentions, but of course there's 200 million going into the Holidays Activities Fund, and there couldn't be a better, more useful, happier way of occupying your time on holiday than by reading a good book, Mr. Speaker.
Can I just gently say to all leaders that in the end I've had to cut off quite a few backbenchers because of the amount of time that's been taken up at the beginning. Can we think about those as well? It's so important that they get their questions heard. There's no points for order for them. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements for the next business.
And that brings us to the end of this week's Prime Minister's Questions. I'd like to welcome our guests for this part of the programme. Robert Courts, who's the Minister for Aviation and Maritime Transport, Alison McGovern, Shadow Minister for Culture and Sport, and the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicki Young, is here with us. Just give us a brief summary, Vicki, if you can, of Keir Starmer's questions, which were all about Boris Johnson's position and the government's stance when it comes to taking the knee.
Yeah, well, I think he realises, Sir Keir Starmer, that he's onto something here, and not just because he believes it, but I think probably more damaging for the Prime Minister than the Leader of the Opposition's questions is the interventions from some Conservative MPs. So Steve Baker, Johnny Mercer, they think that the Conservative Party has got themselves in a tangle in all of this. And if you boil it down, it comes down to, why do you think England players, footballers for the last 16 months have been taking the knee? Now, for some Conservatives, it's been problematic because that originally was linked to Black Lives Matter. They have some policies, some views, which lots of Conservative MPs, lots of other people wouldn't agree with. But I think the point that Steve Baker's making is you're missing the point here if you really believe that Marcus Rashford is taking the knee because he's some kind of Marxist. He's doing it because of racism. And that's why on Sunday night, sort of proved their point. So I think the problem the Prime Minister's got is that he's having to defend comments made by people like Priti Patel and other Conservative MPs who called taking the knee gesture politics. He's now trying to swerve all that and say, look, we're taking a practical approach here. He doesn't want to talk about what he said about the booing of players, what he said about taking the knee. He wants to try and move on and say, look, we're taking practical steps. And he's announced a policy here which is all about online abuse and trying to really say that if you commit online racist abuse, it'll be treated the same way as if you're in a stadium chanting racist abuse, that being you'll be banned from going to matches for life.
And we're going to talk about some of the detail of that policy in just a moment. But first of all, Robert, do you support England's footballers taking the knee?
So, look, I think we've absolutely got to be totally clear about this, and I think we can probably all agree on it as well. Racism in any of its forms, wherever it's found, is absolutely abhorrent, and we have to work hard and come together as a country.
And the answer to my question?
To stamp it out, and that's exactly what we're looking to do. So, on that specific point itself, I know that symbol is very important to some people, and I think if people would like to express their opposition to racism in that way, then that's absolutely fine for them to do so. But I think we've all got to look at how we can make a real practical effort in our own lives, in our professional lives, to make sure that we are also helping to condemn and to eradicate racism wherever we find it.
Right. Well, this was a decision taken by the England football team for the reasons that my colleague Vicki Young has just set out. Was it helpful then to have the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, labelling it as gesture politics, or perhaps Tory MPs like Brendan Clark-Smith saying it's a ridiculous, empty gesture? Or another Conservative, Lee Anderson, saying he wouldn't watch England matches if the team took the knee. Does that sound to you like getting behind England's footballers?
So I think we have seen the whole country come together behind our footballers of the course.
Not those two MPs I've just cited in terms of supporting them and their decision to take the knee.
So I think we've seen everyone really cheering the incredible results that the England team have brought, and we're all really welcome. Now, they've really brought the whole country together, and I just want to pay tribute to all of them for everything that they've done. What we're doing as a government, though, is taking real practical action. As you'll have heard, it's things like the online harms bill, where the Prime Minister's got all the social media leaders together and told them they've got to do more to stamp out racism online, with that really heavy fine if they don't do so. So it's things like that that are making the real difference to make sure that we tackle racism wherever we find it, be it online or be it in person. And there's much else that we're doing as well. I mean, you've mentioned the Home Secretary, for example. Home Secretary is working really hard to make sure that there is greater representation of ethnic minorities in the police, for example. She's taking action in banning far-right groups where they're found. So you're seeing a government that really is taking action where it matters to stamp out racism.
Right, well, Alison, do you agree with that in terms of the Home Secretary, someone who herself has suffered racism over the decades, that she can and is defining what she is doing about it in her own way?
I think that the government's online harms bill is not only delayed, but it is also too narrow and actually won't do what we need to do to protect people and keep them safe online. When it comes to the Home Secretary, you know, I respect her experience, and I think she should talk about her experience and be heard about what it's like to deal with racism in public life. That's very important. So, but let's talk about the action, because the Prime Minister's only come to this issue with banning orders and making sure that that relates to people's actions online as well, because of a petition signed by 1 million people now. He's been forced to do that. They could have brought the online safety bill so that we could have legislated on this issue at any point, during this session of Parliament. Even now, we've been hanging on and hanging on. All we've had is words, no action, actually.
Right, well, let's put that to
I think it's already late, basically.
Right, have you been pushed into this, Robert? It sounds like it from what Alison's saying.
No, not at all. I mean, that clearly isn't the case.
Why is it so late?
You certainly had the Prime Minister's announcement just now, the football banning orders. It's a really welcome step. The online harms legislation has been coming for some time. It's a groundbreaking piece of legislation. The reason it takes time, and I know it's frustrating, we all want to see action on this, and we are taking action, it's just because you have to go through the democratic legislative process. I know it's frustrating.
We've been waiting.
It's important that we do that.
We as the opposition have been asking and asking and asking to have the democratic legislative process. People in football are very anxious about getting this legislation in place for forthcoming tournaments. As it is, we should have had it underway before we hit recess. We now are very unlikely to have it properly underway. So we kicked to September after August. Who knows when we'll get this legislation properly in place, given the pace at which we're going at the moment.
Right, but you do welcome it, Alison, just to get that clear from you.
We not only welcome it, we've been asking and asking and asking for it. Because what's happened is that the online space has moved on, as we know, rapidly, and the legislation hasn't been. Obviously, Parliament has been doing a number of other things like Brexit and so on, and we have not put in place the right legislation. So we as the opposition have been asking and asking for it. What I would say is that legislation is still too narrow and doesn't have enough sanctions in it. So even still, we are going to need everyone to help us campaign to get online safety where it needs to be and make sure that we can keep people safe. Yes, our footballers, who absolutely deserve it, but also I'm worried about every person in this country who might be subject to attack just because of who they are.
Right. I mean, Robert, can I just go back away from the legislation for one moment to something your colleague Steve Baker, Conservative MP, has said, that this is a very decisive moment for the Conservative Party. It's a wake-up call for the Conservative Party over this issue of where they are on taking the knee. Do you agree with him?
So I think it is really important that we emphasise the fact that we are taking decisive action. That is the key point here. And I'd just like to push back on some of the things that Alison's just said around the bill. So, for example, with the sanctions, I mean, the Prime Minister has got all the social media leaders together and has told them that we are taking action, we are legislating, that they're not doing enough. And you have this very strong sanction of 10% of their global revenue, potentially, that can be levied against them. So we really are taking very decisive action here. We are not just talking about condemning racism with words, we're taking real action as well.
Right. That does sound like quite strong action, Alison.
Fines are just seen by too many in our global economy as a cost of doing business. We've seen this in football. People get fined. It's just written off as something that you have to pay, to get on with conducting yourself the way that you were before. And I'm sorry, but I just don't think that fines will actually have the effect that we want to see. It's not good enough.
I don't think Alison's really understanding the scale of this. This is not just any fines, it's 10% of global revenue.
I think I do understand.
Finish the point.
I don't think I need to explain
We've also
to me.
said we'll take action against directors as well.
All right, well, let's pick up on something the Prime Minister said in his opening remarks, because it looked as if he was announcing a new policy, a policy that has been proposed by Labour, Alison, and that's to ban those guilty of online abuse from attending football grounds. You must welcome that, but how would it work in practice?
We do welcome it, and this builds on legislation, the football banning orders that was introduced by a Labour government. It's quite old legislation now and has needed updating for a long time. And I must also pay tribute to the three hijabis, three Muslim women campaigners who set up a petition that I mentioned that has pulled the Prime Minister into this position. So it was them who did it. Obviously, that legislation has that. Football banning orders that are already there have been in place for some time. So there's well-established practice on that. This is about including the online environment as well.
Right. I mean, given the anonymity of many of the accounts that are used, how feasible is it, Robert?
So first thing is I'm really glad that Alison welcomes this. I mean, it's something we can work together with. I think we can all welcome that we're taking action in terms of banning people who are racially abusive on social media. There's clearly a number of technical aspects that we will have to go through in order to make sure that it applies and it works in the online sphere, because of course that's something that's new and has come along, or at least been much more important since this legislation was introduced. So there will be some hurdles to overcome. We're absolutely committed to making sure that we get it right.
Right, because yesterday Newsnight looked at 105 Instagram accounts of people directing abuse, some of the horrendous abuse that we saw at the weekend towards the England footballers, and they found that nearly 60 of the 105 accounts appeared to be of people outside of the UK. How difficult is that going to be then to actually moderate, Alison?
Well, football clubs have actually had to become much more expert at dealing with this. And I think there's two arguments here. Firstly, if we have got people in the UK who are, if they're doing something online for which, if they did it not online, they would be subject to banning orders or whatever, then that's the argument that's being made. There's a further step, though, which is about the steps that social media companies must take to use their platforms and use their algorithms in a way that will protect people. And I think that's where, the content issue that you just mentioned, wherever it comes from, there's a responsibility on social media companies to really look at that and make sure that people are not being subject to horrific abuse, wherever it's coming from. And they can do that using their systems. And, I think that will be dealt with in other aspects of the legislation.
Right, there's an urgent question, Vicki. In fact, I think it is underway now. I think Labour were hoping to see Priti Patel there, but in fact, it's Victoria Atkins, Home Office Minister. So tell us essentially what this urgent question is about.
Well, this is what's interesting here, is that Boris Johnson's clearly tried to preempt it by announcing what Labour are calling for, which is that abuse online is treated the same way as racial abuse in a stadium, so being much stricter about it. But I think we've heard, haven't we, from one of the Labour MPs who wanted to speak in this debate.
Well, shall we just show her tweet, Marsha de Cordova. She says here, and I'm showing our viewers, Robert and Alison, very disappointed not to be selected to speak in Parliament today on racist online abuse. The draw is random, but it doesn't seem right that there isn't a single black MP on the call list for this debate.
I mean, it is astonishing. Now, I know why it's happened, because it's a random ballot. It doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean that it is going to make the debate any better. So one non-white MP has been selected, just one. And I think the problem here is that this demonstrates the issue, doesn't it? The system isn't working. And the problem with a random ballot is if you don't have that many black and Asian MPs, yes, representation has improved over the years, it's still not great, they haven't got a very high chance of getting selected. So, you know, you do wonder whether the Speaker in these kind of circumstances is going to have to step in and do something about that.
Right. Well, I've just been told, actually, that the Speaker has used his discretion, Lindsay Hoyle, and I think two black MPs have been called. But listening to what Vicki has said, Robert, the system needs to change, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Speaker is very good at making sure that people are selected and are heard. It's one of the difficulties we have at the moment because we're working in a COVID world where everything has to be particularly secure. And, hopefully as we get out of this, we'll be able to get back to the more normal system where people can go in and they can bob and can be selected by the Speaker rather than being selected in advance, which is what we're having to do at the moment. But I'm absolutely confident that in any event, the House will ensure that the voices of all MPs are heard, particularly those who have something really important to say. And even if they weren't to be heard in the House, I'm absolutely confident, and I know certainly I would take this view, that the government will listen to anything that anyone has to say. And their voices will be heard in one way or another. Of that, I'm absolutely confident.
But do you think it's disappointing? And do you think Priti Patel, bearing in mind she has been very much at the centre of the debate and the discussion around this issue, that she should have come to the House to answer this urgent question?
No, I think we will make sure that the minister who's answering will be one who is very well briefed and will know all about the matter, will be the relevant minister to answer that question. I'm absolutely confident the government will have a proper response for all MPs today.
Vicki, before we move on, there was another issue that was raised by Keir Starmer, and that is a statement we're going to hear from the Northern Ireland Secretary later on this afternoon. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, and this is another very controversial move. It's how really they feel they're going to deal with the violent past in Northern Ireland. And there's been an awful lot of publicity about court cases against former soldiers, for example. And what the government's going to do is to, we think, end all prosecutions in cases related to the Troubles that predate the peace deal in 1998. Now, victims groups say that this amounts basically to an amnesty, and that some of them are furious about it. I think the problem for the government is that the Irish government plus the five parties in Northern Ireland are not happy about this. So I think that is going to be
there's a lot of political opposition.
And there's a lot of opposition to it, even though lots of Tory MPs have been very much campaigning for it to happen.
Right. Well, Robert, while we've got you here as a Transport Minister, there's been an announcement today by the government that the sale of new diesel and petrol trucks in the UK will be banned from 2040. Now, look, given that the Treasury collects around £28 billion a year in duties on petrol and diesel cars, how are you intending to cover that massive hole in the public finances?
So it's important just to set this in the context, and what we've announced today is the Transport Decarbonisation Plan. And this covers all modes of transport. It's a really, really world-leading piece of legislation. We are the first country to set out a plan as to how we're going to get to net zero transport. And it's not just HGVs, cars, it's also aviation, maritime, and all other sectors as well. So there will be some ramifications of it, of course. But what I really think we should welcome is the fact that we've set out how we're going to achieve decarbonisation in transport, which is one of these, it's a challenge for all of us. There's opportunities for us there as well. But it's something we should all welcome. We're the first people to do this.
Right. So as part of this, are you considering road pricing?
So we set out a plan there, and there's a number of things. What is key is that technology holds the answer. We've already seen, for example,
so is that a yes?
With, cars. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
So is that a yes? You are looking at road pricing and introducing it?
So if you have a look at the plan, and what that really makes clear is that technology has the answer to all of this. We've already seen this with cars. So you're already seeing now about 1 in 7 cars have got a plug. And so that technology is advancing really, really quickly. And HGVs are going to be a part of that as well. We'll always consider what policy might be needed in the future. I don't really want to get into speculating about taxation issues now, because what we're laying out is a plan from the Department for Transport as to how we're going to really push forward decarbonisation. Not just on roads, but in these harder decarbonised sectors as well, like aviation and maritime.
Well, Robert didn't want to speculate. Alison, what about you? Are you in favour of road pricing?
Well, we've got schemes that work. Yes, I think it can be a good thing. Obviously, I think the big problem here is what's gone on over the past 10 years, because whilst we all want to see transport decarbonised, actually the record in terms of the Conservative government has been really poor. Now, that's for a number of reasons. I would actually say that one of the biggest things that we don't talk about is the impact of local authority cuts, because we really need to get people walking and cycling, and I'm sure Robert would agree with that. But when you've asked local authorities to cut huge amounts of their budget, there's a serious limit to what they can actually do. So I think this announcement has to be seen against the backdrop of 10 years where we really have not made a lot of progress. So we'll be, I'm sure, looking quite sceptically at this and, holding the government to account for where we actually get to, not just the plan.
Right, Robert?
So I really do have to point out in those circumstances that the government is investing millions through our cycling and walking plan in precisely that active travel. So I agree with Alison entirely.
You can't take away billions from local authorities and then say, but it's great because we've given you back a few million. I mean, well, look, that's just a ludicrous argument.
Robert?
I don't think it's at all ludicrous to say that you want to have more cycling and walking and that you're investing millions of pounds to enable that to take place. We have got a really coherent strategy here, not just to encourage active travel. I'm a big supporter of walking and cycling myself, but also buses. We've got the Bus Back Better plan. Again, a really groundbreaking plan to make sure that we expand the use of buses throughout the whole of the country and not just in London.
Well, on that note, thank you to both of my guests for joining me. Just to remind you that tomorrow, Vicki Young, my colleague here, will be in the chair presenting Politics Live. Bye-bye.